Is sugar addictive? Let's take a look at this question and see what the scientific literature has to tell us. As with any media, the call of this video is a bit tricky because we have to examine the question to clearly understand what we really mean to ask and what we want to know. We began with the question, is sugar addictive? The first specification is, what do we mean by sugar? Is it table sugar, like sucrose? Or are we also going to include sweeteners, all sweeteners? There are many different types. Any sweet tasting substance? Any carbohydrate? What about food that is not carbohydrate? Well, the motivation for this video came to me when I was thinking about how some people feel an urge, a desire to eat some types of food. Sweets were the most common, but sometimes it were of different types, even salty food. And, as we will see in the articles, it isn't just with sweets that this happens. So in this video we'll be considering table sugar, fructose, including fructose syrup, other refined carbohydrates, sweet tasting substances, products with added sugar, including sodas and other beverages, products that are very caloric, and products with a pleasant and intense taste. We call them hyperpalatable. Since most of the time these products are very industrialized and refined, I will call them as a group by the term products. When I refer to sugar, I will be specifically meaning table sugar, sucrose. Second, what do we mean by addiction? Again, when I initially asked myself this question, I was thinking about people who describe having strong cravings for the food and who feel bad if they can't get that food. So this analogy with addiction of drugs of abuse comes very easily to the mind. And we often use the word addiction informally in day-to-day life. But from a technical point of view, addiction is a specific situation which has criteria for us to say if it's present or not. Generally speaking, very broadly speaking, addiction is present when there is an increased capacity and or need to use the substance or the behavior. We call this tolerance. When there are negative effects, when you try to reduce or stop the usage, we call that withdrawal or abstinence. A very intense desire to use, that we call craving, and that the person has difficulty to reduce or stop the habit despite of the negative effects. And in the case of food, it's a bit confusing even in the scientific literature, whether it even constitutes addiction. So instead of focusing only on addiction, we'll get a clearer picture of the situation if we analyze the possible bodily and mental effects that these products can have. And then we'll be able to reflect about our relation to them. So, our video today has two main questions. First question is, what biological and mental and behavioral effects these products can have on individuals? Second, can food addiction occur? Let's start with the effects these products can have on the body and the mind. For us to understand these effects, we have to take a look on the mechanisms that our body uses to regulate feeding. They are very complex, very well controlled, because by feeding, we not only get the nutrients for us to have energy for our bodily functions, the building blocks of our bodily structures, but there is also a psychological, a behavioral element to feeding. We won't go into the details, you can take a look at the references for further details, but these regulatory mechanisms of feeding include hormones secreted by the gastrointestinal tract, hormones secreted by the adipose tissue, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and stress hormones like cortisol, the work and distension of the viscera of the gut, neuronal network, the cerebral cortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, hypothalamus, some areas of the brainstem. All of these have something to do with the regulation of feeding, both from the nutritional energetic aspect and the psychological behavioral aspect. And they can be affected by what the person eats and how their mental or metabolic state is. Some of the main points the scientific literature brings us are: number one, products such as fructose, sucrose, products with added sugar, hypercaloric, hyperpalatable, are capable of stimulating reward systems, activating the release of endogenous opioids like endorphins, and modifying the activity of several neuroendocrine systems that regulate behavior and motivation. The consumption of these products, at the moment of ingestion of these products, they can reduce the feeling of stress because of reduction in cortisol production, and they can cause the feeling of pleasure, well-being. We call this a hedonic effect. This hedonic effect can become the main regulator of feeding, overcoming the mechanisms that are based on nutritional energetic balance. Second point, I'm raising my eyebrows so much it's causing me a headache. Back to the second point. Consumption of these products can worsen symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, impulsivity, can worsen memory or attention, and predispose the individual to the developing or the worsening of psychiatric conditions, including substance abuse disorder. This usually happens over time. So, at the moment of ingestion, there is this hedonic effect, it alleviates stress, it causes a sensation of well-being, but over time, there can be detrimental effects. Likewise, people in unpleasant emotional states such as anxiety, depression, impulsivity, people that already have a substance abuse disorder are more likely to overconsume products of this profile, given the hedonic effect and the reduction in perceived stress. Next point, the consumption of these products can also cause harmful effects like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, insulin resistance, mitochondrial dysfunction, alterations in the microbiota, particularly of the gastrointestinal tract, among other mechanisms that are present in the majority of the chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, psychiatric disease, neurodegenerative disease, autoimmune disease, cancer, among others. Next point, the consumption of these products can facilitate the development of overweight, obesity, and diabetes. These conditions also make the individual more prone to experiment the psychoactive effect of these products. And final point of this section, high consumption of these products during pregnancy may increase the risk of the child to have developmental problems, and overconsumption in childhood can increase the risk of psychiatric problems in adolescence and adult age. It is also common for pregnant women to have an increased desire for these products. Now we will take a look at the second question. Can food addiction occur? Is food addiction a thing? Well, first and foremost, food addiction does not yet exist as a formally recognized psychiatric condition. All right? However, the amount of scientific evidence pointing to something similar is increasing. When we compare the biochemical and mental behavioral effects of these products and we compare them to drugs of abuse, the main points the scientific literature brings to us are: number one, there are certain similarities between the biochemical effects of these products and some drugs of abuse. The authors of these papers says that just like alcohol, most people consume these products for pleasure, and apparently most people are able to do so in moderation. Point number two, these products have the capacity to cause changes in behavior and changes in the motivational and reward systems. In animals, it has been demonstrated that the behavioral aspect can become the main controller of feeding, overruling the mechanisms focused on the nutritional energetic balance. Point number three, products of this type can cause an association between the act of ingesting them and the feeling of pleasure and well-being. This behavioral aspect that was learned is then added on top of the biochemical effect of these products. Point number four, the scientific literature tells us that there are cases that people develop a condition that is practically indistinguishable from addiction, such as addiction to drugs of abuse. Point number five, it is not unusual for people to consume these products in increasing quantities despite the negative effects. Point number 6. In surveys where people report their personal experiences, it is common for them to describe sensations that are very similar to withdrawal, and cravings, and abstinence when they try to reduce or stop consumption. Point number 7. Exaggerated consumption of these problems can facilitate the development of substance abuse disorder. And the last point, there is some consensus that these products, in fact, can cause addiction in animals, particularly rats. And based on studies of other substances that are capable of addiction in animals may also cause signs of addiction in humans. Now that we've seen what the literature says about it, I'll give my opinion on what I've read and with my personal biases and my personal experience. For most things, asking if something is good or bad is too shallow. We have to know the effect of the substance, who will use it, and how or how much they will use. That's why the phrases during the class were like may increase, may cause, can facilitate. Just like a drug, the result can change depending on the person, the moment, the quantity. So, watch what you eat, what motivates you, and how you feel before and after eating. If you are going to eat these products, don't overdo it. Watch yourself. One important thing to keep in mind is that these products are not food, like legumes, vegetables, meat. They are a different category of substance. These products can be psychoactive. They can influence the behavior and the biochemistry of the brain. They are not essential to our nutrition. The person will not become malnourished if they have a balanced diet without these products, preferably under the supervision of a nutritionist. So, my personal suggestion is to reduce consumption to the minimum possible and observe yourself. The scientific literature brings to us that overconsumption of these products is very linked with suffering, both physical and mental. They kind of reinforce each other. The person seeks relief and well-being, but over time, in the long run, it might end up being worse. In particular, extreme caution in situations like babies, children, pregnant women, and people with physical issues like diabetes, autoimmune disease, obesity, among others, and people with mental health issues. As we have seen in the studies, structural changes can occur in the nervous system with long-term repercussions. So it is important to be mindful of this. And if you feel unwell, avoid radical measures without supervision. Seek help. That was it, folks. I've been wanting to do this video for quite a while now. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.